Okay, as usual, very short notice, so I'm not going to be surprised if there's no one here at first. No. And let me plug in the... I was busy doing that and I got interrupted. There we go. Okay. Cartridge cell somewhere else. Right. Hopefully the audio and everything is okay. Let me know if it's not. And just need to correct that. Okay, so here I am. Hello, Sam. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. Again, hopefully the audio is fine. And while I wait for a couple more of you to pop in. Hello, Caleb. A little white sparkling Garda Frizzantino. Audio seems lower than normal. That any better? Oh, let me see if this is... No, that should be the same. Any improvement? Built-in microphone. There, is that any better? Well, I hope the audio is okay. Anyway, so before I get into the whole looking glass project, just a couple of quick notes. One was the olive oil will be ready for shipping in the next couple of days. I now have, I've got the tins, I've got the labels, I've got the boxes, I've got the bubble wrap for it. And tomorrow I'm going to find out the costs of sending it to various different countries. So that will at some point go up on the next, I would say probably within the next week or so. It'll go on the e-store where I sell the ebooks, and I'll mention that on the blog as well. But it would be very useful. Is anybody else having problems with the audio? Like Sam says that the audio is lower than normal. I can't see that. I've got no issues with it here. It's the same as before. I've lifted the gain a bit, but anybody else? Audio is better. You were projecting your voice at first, I think. Oh, it could be that this thing is slightly in the wrong spot. There you go. Maybe that's better. Anyway, so yeah, the olive oil is gonna go on. There's some paintings for those of you that oh, the fake witch doctor says the sound is fine to him. Good. There's some yeah, some watercolors that I've done. If you've seen the last stream, you know the dangers of, like, you know, making me feel rejected as an artist. Could be global with impact. So maybe go check it out, see what you think. Some of the originals are actually available for purchase as well, not just the print, but that's on select pieces. Anyway, we're now going to talk about the looking glass project. Now, at the bottom of this video on YouTube, I've put a link there to my most recent blog post. I think it's still the latest one, which is called A Strange Hope. So, you know, if you want to go read the blog post at some point later, go and read that, because it discusses pretty much the whole concept of what I'm going to talk about now, in terms of where it's going, a possibility of what might happen in the not so distant future. But now, for those of you that don't know, Project Looking Glass was something that it came about. We first heard about it in the mid 90s, late 90s. And it was around the same time where things like Carnivore and Echelon were being talked about. Now, Carnivore and Echelon were NSA projects which basically recorded every phone call, every email, every mobile call, any electronic communication around the world was essentially just being scooped up by the Americans. And this was back in the early 90s. I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember like a film called Enemy of the State with Will Smith in it. But everything that was shown in that film, Enemy of the State, was already like 10 years out of date by the time they showed that film, minimum, if not 20. The technology that the United States deep state has is well beyond what the average person understands or even believes. You've got to keep in mind that in 1954, Thomas Townsend Brown, who had tried to get private funding for his anti-gravity devices, went to the US Naval Laboratories. This is in 1954. Now, he had been somewhat successful in getting private entrepreneurs to fund his anti-gravity flying discs, but just so happens that the most prominent of these guys died in a plane crash. And, that sort of thing tends to happen to people who have anti-gravity devices, or who fund anti-gravity devices, or who discover anti-gravity devices. So he decided to nip it in the bud, and he went to the US Naval Research Laboratories in 1954. And, there's still videos around of Thomas Townsend Brown flying these discs. They perform better in vacuum than they did in atmosphere and so on. Do you honestly think that after the collection of all of Tesla's papers by the US government in 1947 when he died, and Thomas Townsend Brown's flying discs with anti-gravity in 1954, that the US government has done absolutely nothing with that information for the last, 70 plus years? I don't think so. But if you think so, hey, you should watch a film called Blue Sky. Anyway, the point is, the technology that you think is cutting edge is probably 20 to 30 years at least behind what there is. And there's some technology that they have that is literally mind-bending stuff. If people talk about the chemtrails, and I actually think that I'm the only guy that probably has an inkling of what the chemtrails are. And the thing that sort of made me really become more aware of it was the recent there's some things that I can't say here, otherwise there's some recent events that discuss the concept of graphene. And now in the 90s, 95, there was a French guy who said, look, using microwave technology and some other things, including graphene, you can actually control the brain and the mind of human beings. This has been known again since the early 90s. And there's a DARPA project called HAARP, HAARP, which is harmonic or something or other. Anyway, they can use HAARP to manipulate the weather. They can use HAARP to manipulate to earthquakes and all sorts of things. But with a bunch of chemtrails in the air, which are heavy metals, mostly what they're spraying, they can actually, I believe, affect pretty much the whole planet's population, as well as making you dumber and more diseased and more prone to cancer and so on and so forth. It's a very interesting topic. If you guys are aware of a guy, a YouTuber called the Y-Files, and he's got the Y-Files, he's got a YouTube video on Looking at Glass project, which basically tells the whole story from the side of the frauds, because there are guys that talk nonsense about Looking Glass and so on. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the only guy that I think is somewhat reliable and that I find his story believable is a guy called Bill Wood. His actual name is Bill um, Brockbader, I think. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but anyway, it's on the blog. If you go to the blog thing, his name is there, and a link to the video of the interview he did with I forgot the lady's name, the one that does Camelot, all the conspiracy theory stuff. And there's a part 2 to that as well, which you can find. But I'm not a huge fan of that lady, of how she interviews people and the kind of way she goes about it. But there's a particularly decent interview. It's about 2.5 hours or something. The stuff about Looking Glass starts in about 1 hour 40. It's actually 1 hour 50 something. But I would say go to 1 hour 47 because he talks about the moon and Mars and bases and spaceships and so on, and Area 51, and he makes perfect logical sense. So Bob Lazar and this guy, Bill Wood or Bill Brockbader, however you pronounce his name, I think are two guys that are actually telling the truth. Now, just because he's telling the truth doesn't mean that he might not be wrong about a couple of things here and there, but overall I find his story not just credible, but I find it credible because it's backed up by my own investigations of things since the early 90s and converging data points. There's a guy on Social Galactic that made an expression that applies to me, and he made it in the sense that it applies to me, called single point pattern recognition ability, which is, a problem in terms of generic social stuff, because I'll recognize a pattern of something long before everybody else does, and then I say, oh, by the way, that's what that's going to lead to, and everybody looks at me like I'm fucking crazy for about 20 years, and then 20 years later they go, oh yeah, I remember you called a little while ago, that was pretty smart of you, and I'm like, no, it was just fucking obvious. But I've been looking into this sort of stuff for a long time. I was, my first love was astronomy since I'm a little kid and so on. So all these things tie together. Then martial arts, weirdly enough, ties into this as well, because as Miyamoto Musashi says, if you become really good at one thing, whether you're a painter or whether you're a warrior or whether you're an astronomer, whatever, you begin to see everything in terms of that thing. Now, the reality is that in combat, in high stress situations, that Sistema is the martial art that trains it the best than any other martial art I've ever come across. And if you want to go into that, I've written a book about Sistema. Just go to the blog and go to like books I wrote, and you find link there. There are times in actual hand-to-hand combat where your decision affects the outcome beyond the so-called technical ability that you may or may not have, and it's a very interesting phenomenon. I've tried to explain it in the book. I've done videos on it, and it also relates to prayer, how actual prayer works. Because when I had my Road to Damascus moment in 2013, I spent years, obsessively researching Christianity, essentially, and prayer and so on. And I have empirically tested the concept of prayer, and it just works. Now, those gurus that tell you, oh, just have positive thinking and you're going to become a millionaire or whatever. The problem is that these guys take like an element of truth, of something that is true, and then they twist it for their own ends, which is generally, to buy their seminar products or whatever the hell. Now, I don't begrudge anybody selling information that is good and accurate. I write books. The reason I write the books, the reason I wrote The Face on Mars, the Sistema book, and Reclaiming the Catholic Church and Believe, those are all nonfiction books. The reason I wrote those books is to share this information with a wider audience of people that, don't have the time or the inclination to study about that stuff, but maybe want to know about it. And I make it a point, I'm obsessive in my books about giving credit and backing up what I'm saying. So you don't have to take my word for anything. Essentially, my nonfiction books are kind of like reference books where you can read what I'm saying and the conclusions I've come to, and you can find all the references of where I pull the stuff in from for the most part. Um, and you can try and verify for yourself if what I'm saying is nonsense or not. So far, The Face on Mars was originally written in '95, so it's now been almost 30 years, and the only thing that's happened in that lapse of time was I added some information in 2014, so 10 years ago, concerning the origin of the technology and so on, and it's all, no one's refuted anything, and some of the theories that I had in '95 have now been proven correct, and more correct as time goes on. You know, Similarly, no one can refute what I wrote in Reclaiming the Catholic Church about the Catholicism and sedevacantism and so on. And ditto with Systema. Systema is still the only book that explains exactly how Systema works and why you can do this kind of woo-woo magic shit, which other martial arts, and keep in mind, I come from more than 2 decades of hardcore karate training before I started doing Systema. So I'm not just some like random guy that says, oh yeah, it's like magic. I'm not saying it's magic. That's why I wrote the book, to demystify the people that were saying like, oh, you need to like, focus on the angels or whatever crap they came up with. So keep that in mind now when I tell you about Project Looking Glass and how I see that perspective. In order for this to make sense at a very basic level, you need to understand some concepts of physics that are rarefied. They're way up here, and the average guy doesn't even have the language to process this stuff. Some of these things are at the limit of my ability to understand and comprehend in a way that is useful for me. And they're beyond me in terms of the mathematics involved. The mathematics involved are beyond me. However, if you're interested in the stuff, if you go to my blog and you use the search me button on the right and you type in keywords like Maxwell's equations, ether, Harold Aspen, and so on, you will find some pretty involved and detailed documentation and references and concepts about this stuff. What I'm going to give you now is the like Cliff's Notes, idiot's version in layman's terms. So, if there are any guys here that are following that sort of stuff and that are au fait with what I'm going to be talking about, it's not going to be like spot on, detailed, correct. It's a model that I'm going to present to you that works, okay? And before we get into Project Looking Glass and what that does and where I think it's going and what I think it's showing, you need a little bit of background first. So the background is this. The ether is a thing. It's not quite as they thought in the 1800s, but the ether is a thing. It's real, it exists, and it explains a lot of stuff that so-called quantum mechanics and string theory does not. Quantum mechanics and string theory is the equivalent of a blind man in a room with a hammer trying to describe everything in terms of what happens when he uses the hammer randomly in the room. The concept of the ether is a much more elegant and much more satisfactory and much more capable of predicting things that we hardly can talk about now. The concept of the ether is that it's sometimes also referred to as zero-point energy, vacuum fluctuations, blah, blah, blah. I call it ether because it's a more elegant name and it better comes across to explain what I'm trying to explain. So in the vacuum of space, take a cubic meter of vacuum of space where there's like nothing. It's so empty that there's not even a hydrogen molecule in it, okay? It's just literally empty vacuum of space. In that vacuum of space, there is an underlying reality wherein there is an incredible bubbling of energy where protons, electrons, neutrons, quarks, all the stuff is appearing and disappearing constantly. So although what we perceive is nothingness, it's an empty cubic meter of nothingness, the reality is that there's a huge amount of energy flowing through that. The energy that is in 1 cubic meter of empty space could literally be used to boil off into steam every single drop of water on planet Earth. So that gives you a rough idea of the kind of energy that we're talking about, and that's present there. Another analogy that I sometimes use is that we're kind of like fish. You're a fish in the water, and there's another fish telling you, hey, you know there's water all around us? And the other fish is like, what the fuck are you talking about? What's water? It's like, no, you know, the currents. Oh, you mean the wind that like sometimes pushes it? No, it's a current, and it's because water flows from hot zones to cold zones. And the other fish is like, what is this water you're talking about? Because they're in it. They can't perceive it. It's just what they live in. And that's kind of our reality. So there's these massive amounts of energy flowing all the time through every cubic meter, even of empty space, never mind of space that actually has stuff in it. Because keep in mind that what they call Einstein's theory, which he plagiarized from some papers in the 1800s and early 1900s, and if you want to read up on that, go to haroldaston.org, which is a website that I used to maintain. Now a very good friend of mine is doing it off his own back. And most of Harold Aston's books are there, including one called Physics Without Einstein. Einstein plagiarized everything. He was an absolute sex pervert, and he abandoned his child and married and banged his own cousin. So that's who Einstein was. If you didn't know that, hey, join the club. I didn't know that when I was a teenager, and I used to think he was a cool guy. He isn't. He wasn't. So anyway, to get back to this ether thing. The ether thing is also related to scalar energy, which is a topic that Thomas Bearden used to talk about. Thomas Bearden passed away not too long ago. He was a retired lieutenant colonel in the US Army. He wrote a bunch of books, and he also has his website still up, being maintained by a friend of his. I bought a bunch of his books, I think, either just after or just before he died, just to have them. I haven't had a chance to go through them yet. But Thomas Bearden was trying to explain the physics behind over-unity devices. And he worked with a guy called Bedini, who actually built these devices, and they seem to produce more energy than what you put in. The reason I mention this is because this incredible amount of energy that exists in empty space is accessible. There are certain machinery that you can build that gets access to this energy, and that's very important because these machines, generally speaking, we can call them anti-gravity devices, because once you get access to that level of energy, you've got essentially energy, infinite amounts of energy. You now have energy that can power the whole planet wirelessly, no cables needed, no roads needed anymore, because, hey, you can fly around in the actual flying car. You can make them really safe because you can have them have fail-safes where a gravity flying, anti-gravity using car that comes too close to anything else has some fail-safes that stops it and whatever. And keep in mind that the US Navy has had this since 1954. Now, this guy, Bill Wood, or I'll call him Bill Wood, although it's not his real name because it's just easier for me to pronounce. He talks about Area 51 or S4. Now, keep in mind that the Nazis had underground bases that built anti-gravity devices, and also the other Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons like the V1, V2, etc. The underground bases that the Nazis had were called, chronologically, S1, S2, and S3. Then the war ended. Thousands of Nazi scientists were taken over to America under Project Paperclip, and a bunch of them were over to Soviet Russia. And, well, they became the guys who made the Apollo program. And now at Area 51, you've got S4. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that it's called S4. But Bill Wood talks about how in S4 what they have are whole armadas of anti-gravity device machines, which people think, oh, it's UFOs. And he's like, no, they don't need to be UFOs. They're ours. We're building them, and we got a shitload of them. And by now, we should have fleets of them. There's a guy on YouTube who I always forget to try and find again, oh, he was on YouTube, I don't know if he's still around, but he used to have a big telescope, and he used to literally film these flying spacecrafts in Earth orbit that were huge. And, he was a guy that was really good at astronomy, and he's like, oh, that one must be about 200 or 300 meters long. Sounds like science fiction, but you remember a guy called McKinnick? And if you're interested in that, go to my blog and type into the search me Red Space. Red Space was a short story I wrote for an anthology that Vox Day published, but, Vox is a friend, so I'm not, but he crippled my short story by editing a whole bunch of really pivotal stuff, which was actually the central point of the story, out of it. So if you want the full unedited version, you go to the blog and you type in Red Space. And that will educate you a little bit about how these anti-gravity machines and whole things are funded. And the fact that there was a British autist which basically broke into the Pentagon and downloaded and saw like lists of spaceships with up to 300 people on board. These are big ships. It also ties into the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk project. These were experiments that were trying to make the ship go invisible, and by various accounts, Charles Berlitz, the guy who wrote the Bermuda Triangle and various kind of early day conspiracy theories type stuff, he wrote a pretty good book on the Philadelphia experiment. And what apparently happened is they basically managed to like get this ship to sort of disappear, but it wasn't just invisibility, it wasn't just bending light around it, it actually put it out of phase, and some of the people on the ship actually ended up, when the ship came back, being embedded in the steel. So they're like, if you guys are familiar with the X-Men, Kitty Pryde, the girl that can sort of like just walk through walls. She becomes kind of a phantom, and she can hold on to somebody and make them walk through wall. But if she leaves them halfway when she's trying to go, they're like half embedded into the wall. So that's apparently what happens in the Philadelphia experiment. Now, all these things are tied together because in order to create these effects, whether it's bending light, whether it's anti-gravity devices, or whether it's wormholes, you need access to this zero-point energy or the ether. And the way you do that is create a machine that creates the tiniest potential difference. Anything that creates a potential difference between A and B creates a path where energy flows down. Usually we call that electricity. Now, to give you an idea, the calculation to create a wormhole that's like 1 meter in diameter, so you're just barely enough for a guy to like jump through if he does it like horizontally. The amount of energy that you need to create that, you would have to convert the entire physical mass of the planet Jupiter into energy using the E equals mc squared formula. E equals mc squared means the energy is equal to the mass times the speed of light squared. Now the speed of light is 300,000 kilometers per second. You've got to square that, so multiply it by itself, it's a big number, and then you multiply that by the mass, and that's the energy. To give you an idea of proportions, 1 gram of matter, if you could convert 1 gram, just 1 gram of matter, which is like, 1 gram is about that. It's a tiny piece of paper, about that big. That's about 1 gram. If you could convert this to energy that can be used by human beings to power their own body, you could feed 25,600 people for a year. Or alternatively, 25,600 people for a year, or 1 person for 25,600 years. So imagine how much energy you need to create a bigger wormhole when a 1 meter diameter one requires you to convert the entire mass of the planet Jupiter. Keep in mind that the Earth fits many, 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 many times inside the planet Jupiter. Nevertheless, if you have there's so much energy in this, ether, that if you can create a machine that creates the potential difference, you can access it. And you can access it to the point where you can create big wormholes where spaceships fly through. And certainly, even if you don't create wormholes, you can certainly create gravity fields that accelerate the ship in whichever direction, which explains all UFO movements, which explains how UFOs can blink in and out of existence because they can bend light around it if you can shape the gravity fields around it, and so on. Now, having given you all that sort of background, which hopefully still fits within the realm of physics that you can wrap your head around, We now step into something more complex, still valid and absolutely scientifically proven, but not known about by most people on Earth, including physicists. And now we enter the realm of a Russian scientist called Peter Garayev, with whom I have corresponded by email when I wrote the Systema book. So if you're interested in the stuff, get the Systema book. I know the Systema book's expensive. It's like $60 or $80, I don't know. But it comes with like access to 40 videos online that you can go and look at that explain to you how Systema works. I'm the only guy that's discussed Systema and the fighting in martial arts with respect to this stuff I'm going to tell you about. The reason for that is because coincidentally, I was also looking at a guy called Roland McCraty. Roland McCraty is an American guy who trains special ops team to learn to have precognition. And a bit of backstory again. Now, precognition is a real thing that human beings can do. There's a small percentage of human beings that can do precognition. Precognition is the ability to see a little bit forward in time. And it usually happens in, extreme situations, life and death situations, a real threat that's about to kill you. So it would be very useful for special ops teams to have a slight warning about, oh, they're going to blow up on an IED or somebody's going to shoot them or whatever. Now, Roland McCraty has done tests on this with men and women, and it's a very interesting test, and you should go and read up the stuff in the Systema book that I talk about that, because it's very interesting. Because the way that men and women react to precognition is very telling about our biology and about the role of men in society and the role of women in society. It's very interesting. It's a side issue, which, by the way, Roland McCraty didn't even know or think about. I did, and I talk about it in the book. But anyway, what I'm saying is this guy is getting paid to train special ops teams to learn how to have precognition as an ability. Precognition is a real thing. There's a meta-study. The most famous one was done by Honorton and Ferrari. I have that meta-study in the Systema book. I talk about it in there. And it was a meta-study of all studies on precognition and so on. There's also another book called, I can't remember the name, by a lady who studied the topic of ESP and various things like telepathy and so on. And there is also a guy called Michael Persinger, who's got a 2-hour YouTube video called No More Secrets that explains technically how telepathy actually works. And telepathy is a real thing, and it also works. Now, if you can do telepathy, if you've got precognition, and if you've got this kind of things, and if you can see auras, which I discuss in the book, I teach you how to do that, how to do auras and how to do short-range telepathy. That's all in the Systema book. It's not a lie, it's not fake, it works. And there's going to be courses that I'm going to be doing for those who really want like one-on-one training, but they're not going to be cheap. But I will be doing them. I'm doing a course with that with a guy as a test run. But anyway, that's a side point. The thing is, these things are real and they exist. Peter Garayev is a guy who understood how this stuff works to a degree that's blown everybody else out the water. And I didn't know if Peter Garayev was real, if the stuff that they wrote about him and they said about him was myth or real. But I found him. I emailed him. He only speaks Russian. I only spoke English. We didn't speak a common language, but I've got very good Russian friends. I had a Russian girlfriend at the time. So they were translating the emails between us. And he sent me his book or monologue on the wave genome, it's called. And those of you that speak Russian, you can probably get it if you ping him an email or whatever. Basically, what Peter Garayev discovered or found out, and again, I'm using layman's terms, is that human DNA, the Western people think that human DNA, the DNA that works, that does its job, it's like 2%, and then 98% of our DNA is like junk DNA. Well, it's not junk DNA. That DNA has the ability to create temporal mini wormholes, if you like. And this is why things like hypnosis, regression, timeline therapy, and stuff like that works and heals people. Now, before I came across Peter Garayev, I had already been an obsessive user of hypnosis on myself, and I experienced things that I couldn't explain but they were absolutely real, tested on myself, on my own body, on my own skin, and on other people, but first of all on myself, to the nth degree. And I knew that this stuff was real. I wasn't imagining it. I read all the literature I could come across on hypnosis because of this. I'm probably the only person on earth that has read just about every single thing that Milton Erickson wrote. Milton Erickson did an experiment that lasted decades. It literally lasted something like 40 years. And if you read his experiment, and he talks about his experiments, and he talks about what he did and what, it's frustrating as hell, because there's pages and pages about his experiment and the results he gets and what he did and how he hypnotized this person in this context and that person, and seminars where he hypnotized a whole bunch of people and some people in the audience and not others. And he goes on and on and on and on. And you're like, but what the fuck's it all for? After like 40 years of doing this experiment, he wrote, finally I found it, his conclusion on this experiment. It's one page. It's a one page. And you really need to understand how Milton Erickson thought and how he did things, which you won't unless you've spent 8 months reading 20,000 pages of his work, as I did, for between 4 to 8 hours a day, every day. I had a job at the time where I literally had to do fuck all, so I sat in the office and I read Milton Erickson stuff from when I got in the morning to when I left in the evening. The amount of work I had to do for about 8 months in that job was nil. There was absolutely nothing I could do because all the contracts were already in place, and all I had to do was the payments, which literally I organized myself, and it took me like 5 minutes once a month. But they were paying me, and hey, that's fine. I used that time very productively. And as a result of reading what he himself wrote, I became very familiar with how Milton Erickson thought. Milton Erickson has been accused of being a misogynist, an unethical person, a guy who, did things to his patients, against their own well-being. Absolute fucking nonsense. Milton Erickson remains the only hypnotist that cured people that no one else knew what the hell to do with them. And he was absolutely ethical. And he was so ethical that he managed to convince the world about certain things about hypnosis, which I'm not going to mention here because I think his efforts were meritorious, were good, and it was a good thing he did that. But most people believe that hypnosis has got certain limits, which are not actually the limits that hypnosis has. And the reason for that is because he didn't want people to use it for, nefarious reasons. Now, the people in the deep state and so on, they know all about this, and they absolutely know the depths at which hypnosis can go, including the woo-woo stuff I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. But the average hypnotist is not very good, just like the average psychologist is not very good. The average hypnotist is a power-hungry, weird gamma that wants to have power over people and feel like he's like the hero at best, if not the manipulator of oh, I can't wait to get a sexy woman and then make her fall in love with me with hypnosis. So unfortunately, most hypnotists are not good. A good hypnotist is few and far between, and that doesn't mean he's ethical. You can get a good hypnotist who's not ethical. So just because a guy is good at hypnosis doesn't mean he's necessarily good. I have met good hypnotists that are ethical. One comes to mind. I've met a couple of lady hypnotists which are decent. They're pretty good. And they are ethical, but they're not world-class material. They present as world-class. They work as that as their job. But in my opinion and in my personal ability, I believe I can outperform them, and I believe that they do some errors which potentially could cause minor damage. They're not the kind of people. They are very careful and they are ethical. So I would say a total of about 3. Now, I've worked with a bunch of world-class people that I'm not going to mention because whatever. I've also met a couple of them that are good hypnotists, one of them very good, but they are not ethical, and they use their skill to gain money, power, influence over other people, predominantly women. It doesn't last. It's not a huge concern in the sense that, it's not like they're raping little kids or anything, but they're influencing women that might not end up doing what they would do with them. But, where's the line? I mean, if a guy talks fancy to you and you end up going in bed with him because you like what he's saying, is he a bad guy? I don't know. It's a gray area. It's stuff that I wouldn't do and I haven't done, but, whatever. Like, a lot of men talk a lot of shit to get a woman in bed. So these guys just took it to another level. And there's a couple of them. And then there's like really nefarious fucks, like Bandler and Grinder. Now, Bandler being the worst of the two, that wrote a book called, is it The Fabric of Magic or something like that? Turtles All the Way Down, something like that. What these guys did, they studied Milton Erickson and they shortcutted it. They did Mac hypnosis. So they took the very deep professional, fundamental and organic work of Milton Erickson, and they reduced it to a plastic bubble that they can sell within 5 minutes. And they called it NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, which, NLP does work within a short period of time and can seem to produce spectacular results. But very often it's non-sustainable. Very often it's a gimmicky type of thing that's a quick fix but doesn't hold over time, and so on. And Bandler, of course, was a cokehead, and he is responsible. It was him, another guy, and his then on-off girlfriend that went on a coke binge, and she got shot in the face with a .357 Magnum and died, and neither him nor the other guy went to jail for it. So he was an absolute con man and a scumbag, and people like write about Bandler as though he's like some cool guy. He's an absolute piece of shit. The reason I mention hypnosis, let me go back, is because things like timeline therapy, which I do and I've done often and successfully, with people where you essentially, somebody has got a trauma in their past and you put them in a situation where they go back to that trauma and they resolve it in the past, but it affects their present and it affects their future. Now, what Peter Garayev essentially proved, and he proved it empirically, physically in the world using laser interferometry to affect seeds that were essentially dead. They took seeds from like the Chernobyl area that were like irradiated and they were like not viable, and they essentially shone like some laser light onto like viable seeds of the same plant, and then refracted that back onto the damaged seeds, and these seeds became sort of alive and living again. And how the hell can you do that? Well, because it's information. It's just information, which also ties me into another thing, which is the processing of information, or the transmitting of information faster than the speed of light. This was already done in 92 in Cologne. They transmitted Mozart's 40th Symphony at 4.7 times the speed of light using quantum tunneling. Why am I telling you all these disparate things? Because they're all related to the ether. They're all related to this bubbling of reality that's happening all around us all the time. And they're related to the fact that you can transmit this information faster than light, that you can transmit this information in these ether or scalar concept in a way that creates absolutely not even a ripple here on the surface, and when it pops out on the other side can literally blow up a planet. A guy called Joseph Farrell reckons that that's what the Giza pyramids are. He calls them the Giza Death Star. He reckons that the pyramids at Giza were essentially a weapon that could be calibrated to send massive amounts of energy, of the scalar energy, through this ether and pop out at specific points where it could damage another planet or something in space or whatever. Anyway, all of this to mention that if in our very own DNA we've got like some aspect of time travel, because essentially that's what you're doing, you're sending information back in time through your DNA that changes your DNA back in time and then affects you here in the here and now, rewires your whole brain and creates a different possibility for you in the future. And that's a real thing. That is hypnosis. Now, the other thing that you get when you go into deep hypnotic trance is like time warping, and it also affects electronic things. I fucked up 3 phones because I went into a deep trance with my phone next to me, and I learned after that. I literally, they, like the the Nokia is the one that survived the best, because that one just like switched off, and then after like a day or two, it like came back on. But the second time I did it, it like was out, and then I had like Samsungs and whatever, and they just died. So I learned to like keep a phone at least like several meters away from me when I went into a trance. And I'm not the only person that has experienced this. There are people that have done, things like hypnosis or deep meditation that have got the same experience. So it affects electromagnetic fields. It affects time, not just your perception of time, but actually in the real world. And it also affects reality, as in, and here I have to bring in another guy called Vadim Zeland, who wrote a book called Transurfing Reality, which he was basically explaining that reality is almost like the average of the some belief systems of all of humanity, and that's the reality we inhabit. But sometimes you get a guy with like really strong belief systems, or there's a little wave of fluctuation in that particular area of reality, and they disappear, they blink out, and they blink in possibly somewhere else on an alternate timeline where, I don't know, worse, Hillary Clinton is president, or better, Trump got rid of all the of all the guys that were like backstabbing him, and the world is a cool, clean place with no usury or crappy banking systems, etc. So it's a theory, but the point is, this concept that reality is the overall average of what human beings all deeply, deeply held beliefs is not new, and I think it certainly ties in with my empirical testing of prayer. It ties in with my personal experiences, again, empirical, objective experiences with other people, with myself, of how hypnosis works, and therefore the work of Peter Karayev and the work of Roland McCraty in terms of precognition, because I've personally had precognition events that saved my life, absolutely saved my life at least twice. And I've had precognition events that probably saved my life and other people's lives about 2 or 3 times after that. And this was before I knew any of this stuff. They were very clear precognition events. I got an image in my head, and I turned around, and it was about what I'd just seen was literally seconds away from happening. Now, you can imagine that if you're a guy in the military, a special ops guy, the idea, the ability to have a 1 or 2 seconds ahead knowledge of what's going to come is very useful, and it can literally save your life and other people's lives. So all of this brings into this thing about Looking Glass. Now, Looking Glass is a project that, like I said, go and see the video that I linked to here, discussing this Bill Wood guy who was trained to be able to do things like telepathy and remote viewing and precognition and so on. And you can be trained. And we now know this because the work of Roland McCraty is, you can look it up. I'm not making this up. It's not top secret anymore. It's known that you can train people to do this stuff. And he was trained to do this stuff, a long time ago. Keep in mind that if they're telling us now that, oh, by the way, some of the stuff might work, they were doing that like, early 90s with him. And they created this machine that was essentially a mixture of technology, the ability of people with these abilities that have been trained to like go into specific sort of mind state to be able to try and predict the future, sort of enhanced, if you like, by this machine that they called Looking Glass, could sort of predict, could see what was going to happen. They'd be asked a question as like, oh, what happens if we do this? And they could see a future in it. Now, I personally think he's reliable, because one thing that he says, he mentions that whoever the operator was, whatever his biases were, would influence what they would see as an outcome, which makes absolute sense. So, if a guy was predisposed towards a certain thing, then he was more likely to see whatever that predisposition was, whether it was war, famine, or good things, and so on. And But he also mentioned that there are some people, which I think will be on the autistic spectrum, that can be very objective, that can be trained to like keep their biases out of it and be very like clear-minded about the questions that they're being asked or the possible scenarios that might unfold. And what's happened is that in the 90s, around then, the people that had the control of this machine, that got all the reports, are what we would call the elite, the people that actually run the world. I'm going to have a sip because I'm getting parched. So these so-called elites, whatever, Rothschilds, etc., started to realize in about the 90s that whatever choices they made, whatever ways they tried to push the world, there was a confluence that seemed to be about the 21st of December 2012, which coincided precisely with the Mayan calendar. Now, we have to backstep again. The Mayans used to have calendars that were on for like 26,000 years, which like when they first discovered them, I'm like, what the fuck is this? Why were these guys figuring this stuff out? Well, the reason is because the axis of the Earth is tilted, and every 26,000 something years, it points to a different constellation. And at the end of each one of these cycles of 25,600 or whatever it is years, I forget the exact number right now, there is usually a dramatic shift in everything. Physical, polar shifts, um, upheavals of tectonic plates, but also consciousness shifts. And the so-called golden age of, some 12,000 plus years ago, the age of Leo, apparently, there's different cycles. The 2,500 years, and then there's a 25,000 year cycles. There are different cycles. So the golden age was the age of Leo, about 12,000 BC. That's when the Sphinx was built, and we know this now thanks to the work of Robert Schoch, who was a geologist and who worked closely with John Anthony West, whom I met and had dinner with a couple of times in London. John Anthony West has now passed away. He died. But anyway, the Sphinx was originally built as a lion. It wasn't anything to do with the pharaohs and so on, and neither were the pyramids. They were like taken over by the pharaohs as, oh, well, that's the coolest thing, so I'm going to put my name on it type of thing. Anyway, all of this because if the Mayans had that knowledge, and if the ancient Egyptians had the knowledge of the royal cubit, which, by the way, is 1/10,000th part of the distance between the top of the Earth, the North Pole, and the center of the Earth, which can be a very precisely measured unit because it's a straight line, as opposed to the meter. The meter is supposed to be 1/10,000th part of, from the top of the Earth, if you go along the curvature of the Earth to the equator, and divide that into 10 million parts, that's supposed to be a meter, but it's not an accurate measure because the Earth's not a perfect sphere. And in fact, as a result of that, the meter got redefined as the distance that light travels in a vanishingly small amount of time. But the royal cubit is actually a very precise measure that's based on the geology, the physiology of our planet. And the royal inch, the primitive inch, is a very, very close relationship to the British inch and the so-called American imperial inch, which, it irks me a little bit because I kind of like thinking meters and so on, but it is a more elegant method of measurement. And it is based on this planet. Also, the other thing is any planet could have that same rule applied to it, and the dimensions and the measures of each planet would be specific to that planet's size, which I think is interesting. It's an interesting and elegant way of doing things where, yes, your unit of measure changes from planet to planet, but you could easily figure that out, So, anyway, the reason I mentioned this is because if the Egyptians had that knowledge, they could only have that knowledge if they knew about the Earth being a sphere and floating in space and its size. Ditto the Mayans, if they had this, like, precession of the equinoxes and all the stuff figured out to that level of degree. And there is, of course, mythology throughout the world about the gods coming down from the sky in these flying machines and doing all sorts of shit and still fighting with each other, and we're the monkeys that they genetically engineered to like do their work. Which, if you're interested in that stuff, then buy my book, the face on Mars and read all of that, because all of that's in there in a lot more detail. Anyway, the point is, when they saw that there's a convergence, there was a confluence of all the timelines, of all the possible things that they tried to do would lead to the same outcome, and it went to this funnel in about 2012, the so-called elite, to use Bill Wood's exact words, sends them in a blind panic. So much so that they tried everything, and they kind of got him to come there and say, look, can you confirm that this is what's going to happen? And he said, yeah, pretty much. He did his thing, and he's like, yeah, that's what's going to happen. But I don't know how to fix it, and I don't know exactly what's going to happen because you guys won't tell me, but I can tell you that all the timelines are going there. Now, apparently, there's option 1 and option 2. Option 1 is there's a great awakening of all of humanity. We all become awake. All the hidden shit that we've been lied to since birth comes out. We become aware of it, including all the horrific shit that we've been lied about, and the very good, cool technology that we've been lied about. But it all comes out, and as a result, the human consciousness raises. We get rid of these fucking parasitic, satanic, pedivores that are controlling the whole planet, and it becomes an age of glory and beauty and peace and harmony, which, by the way, is also prophesied in a lot of Catholic mystics over a period of about 400 or 500 years. So it's not like they all got together and decided, hey, they all have this vision, which is like really, really bad times, almost like end times, bad times, and then we come out of it, and Catholicism becomes the world religion, and we all realize the truth, and we're all friendly and happy with each other. Proper Catholicism, of course, not the Bergoglian satanic stuff. So that's the background to this machine. How would this machine work? Well, it essentially would use this ether type technology and some aspects of human DNA to like get the little temporal wormholes in place so that you could take a peek into potential probabilities. And like I've said, they're basically these two that sent the bad guys, if you want to call them that, into a panic, because it didn't matter what they did. It was like, like the way he describes it is like a chess game between the good guy and a bad guy, but the good guy knows exactly every move, and everybody knows the game is going to win. The good guy is going to win, but it's like, the bad guys can cause as much damage as possible before they lose. That's kind of the scenario he mentioned. Now, if you look at the last 4 years, what do you think that the average amount of fear, horror, chaos, disruption, and anxiety of the average human on planet Earth over the last 4 years, do you think that's gone up or down? And what will be the purpose of making it go up? Well, if reality is affected by our internal core belief and system that we exist at, then if everybody's in a panic and scared and anxious, we're going to create that panic, scare, and anxiety. There was a very short story in one of the graphic novels that in Italy we have every week. There's like Lancio Story and Scorpio. They're like they're adult graphic novels usually, and they have like serial graphic novels that go on. They've been around since I'm a little kid. One of the short stories, sometimes they're short stories, sometimes they're serials that go on and so on. One of the short stories was about this future where, as long as you think good thoughts, it's good things happen. But if you start to doubt the person that you're living with, like your wife or your husband, if you start to think they're going to turn into a monster, then they'll turn into a monster. And it's like, you go to bed and you're like, good night, honey, I love you, love you. It's like, talk about not going to bed angry, right? Because even if they have a bad dream that you're a bad guy, then you turn into a bad guy, or vice versa. And, it was like, that's the ultimate sort of like fear thing, right? Imagine that, if you believe that werewolves exist, they suddenly pop into appearance. If you believe that, to use Dungeons and Dragons parlance, they're just suddenly going to be surrounded by like portal gnolls with a raping attitude, you're going to suddenly be raped by gnolls that just appear into your bedroom. Um, and imagine that would be how it is if, if you think it sort of happens. And alternatively, you could think really great thoughts, and you could think, oh, cool, my life is great, I'm wealthy, everybody loves me, I've got a great wife, cool kids, or whatever. You'll tend to find that if you do that, if you're in that way inclined, and you think, oh, I've got a great life, I've got my 70-foot trimaran with an all-female crew of nymphomaniacs, that might work for a little bit, but it's unsustainable because, like it or not, believe it or not, I don't care if you believe it or not, the actual Catholic belief system on how to comport yourself and what a good human being should do and should not do is true. Fortunately or unfortunately, as the case may be for you, if you're a hedonistic guy that likes banging around, well, you're probably not going to like what I just said. If you're a pious Catholic that is a much better Catholic than I am, probably knows, yeah, finally some guy gets it. So that is how it works. So the hedonistic lifestyle is not conducive to a good, happy life long term, but that's where we're at. So anyway, now my point was, well, okay, let's say that this is all true, and that we're going for the good side of things. How might that happen? And I have to choose my words carefully, so go to the blog if you want more details. But most people didn't have on the bingo card that Russia was going to take out Ukraine, because most people didn't follow what was going on. Most people were not aware of, the biolabs all over Ukraine, which America has. They have them all over the world. They have them in America. They have them in Italy. They have them pretty much fucking everywhere. And the fact that there were treaties in place after the Second World War that limited NATO to a certain border, which America has consistently pushed beyond and right up to the doorstep of Russia. Imagine if Russia was going to put nuclear weapons in Mexico. Do you really think that America would just go like, yeah, that's cool? But that's basically what they were doing, right? So, and Putin has been saying this since 2008, and he was very patient throughout the whole Ukraine, Maidan, puppet government overthrow by America. Again, this is not conspiracy theory. Victoria Nuland spelt it out. She's on video saying, yeah, we changed the regime in Ukraine by paying NGOs $5 billion. It's a known thing. Anyone that was paying attention at the time knew this. I remember having an argument with a guy that I used to work with, who was actually really good at his job, and I quite liked him in many respects. But we ended up going, for dinner with the team, and we started talking about this stuff. And he was like, "No, Russia's the evil guy." So I was like, "How can you be so brainwashed to believe blindly what you're told on TV and not even do like 1 minute's worth of research?" But he wouldn't budge. He genuinely thought that Russia were the bad guys, while they were just defending themselves. Anyway, the point is that the fact of Russia taking out Ukraine, you could sort of predict if you knew what was going on, but most people didn't. The fact of Israel essentially trying to, nuke Lebanon, nuke Palestine out of existence, no one had that on their bingo card. And I think they miscalculated because, if we're talking about looking glass in terms of looking glass and in terms of the elite wanting to go down the, hellish dystopian route so that they control the whole world and everyone in it, or, and then trying to fight the good version of things, well, they need to create war and chaos and economic collapse all over the world. Now, they're definitely setting up for economic collapse. Mathematics tells you that economic collapse is absolutely a certainty. It's not an if and or but. It's just a when. And they've changed a whole bunch of laws with banks, with mortgages, with central banks are stocking up on gold. Texas is making some weird noises about they're gonna secede and they're gonna have a gold and silver backed currency. It's never gonna happen without actual civil war because the deep state in America would never allow that to take place. So I don't know if it's just gatekeeping the usual, Freemasonic plays both sides of the coins, gatekeeping to like, yeah, rah, 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 and then nothing really happens. Because, I mean, the governor of Texas, Abbott, is a creature of the World Economic Forum anyway, so who knows? But the point is, it's not going their way. NATO's been depleted by all weapons. Russia is got no intention of invading Europe, despite that's what they're trying to scream at everybody. And I guarantee you now that like 90% of Italians are like, yeah, Russia's not going to invade Europe, and we don't give a shit. And you know what? If they did, could they just take out our government too, and it'll probably be better, So, and so is most Germans, and so the German farmers right now and French farmers are blocking the main cities. You're not being told that in the mainstream media, but like things are starting to boil over quite a bit. And it's not going their way. They need absolute war and terror to like spread like wildfire. They can't think of how to make it happen. Israel is now trying to push, and there's rumors that Israel is going to attack Lebanon. Now, I think this could be their biggest miscalculation, because I think if Israel does that, there's a good chance that at least one of the Arab countries in that area, I mean, think about it. You've got, you've got Egypt, you've got Syria, you've got Iran, you've got Saudi Arabia, you've got Jordan, they're surrounded by Muslim countries. And if one of them reckons that, we've had fucking enough of these Israelis, and they just go flat out, they all go full out, total, war of extermination against Israel, and or like Israel is trying to do to Palestine, Israel is not going to survive. And if you think, oh, well, the Americans will back them up. Yeah, the Americans will back them up as much as they can. Unless they start to use nukes, they won't be able to do a fucking thing about it. I mean, the Houthis, which are, the Houthis are basically like the Ewoks, or like, what's the other guys? The guys that go, Houdini, those little guys in Star Wars that like kidnap R2-D2, the Jawas. The Houthis are basically like the Sand People or the Jawas. They're like a bunch of like scrabbled rebels with like rocket grenades, and they're fucking up the shipping in the Red Sea. They're literally stopping US, UK, and Israeli ships. They're fucking up world shipping for the countries that are like supporting Israel. And they're a bunch of ragtag rebels. And these guys are, like the Afghanis. You can try and bomb them from the sky for the next 30 years. They ain't going to stop. And they will eventually win. And America has only got like, if you include the Marines, they've got still less than 1 million soldiers, active soldiers. And if they're like about 700,000, something like that. And that includes the cooks, the staff, and everybody. It doesn't include only fighting men. Even if let's say they put the draft in, who's going to go for the draft? Who's actually, the people that can actually fight, the like rednecks that are usually the core of American military that's good, those guys are going to be like, yeah, well, fuck this. If I got to go and get shot by some Arab out there in Arabia, I might as well get shot by a federal agent out here in Appalachia. And he's going to take his .50 caliber, going to the hills, and good luck getting him out of there. So who's going to go for the draft? I mean, who are the people in the US military right now? Because they've been talking about giving like guys who enter America illegally citizenship if they serve in the military. So you've basically got a foreign military already entrenched in your own military. And you think those guys are going to go over and fight for Israel? Especially when a lot of them like don't give a crap about Israel or Jews or any of that stuff? I don't think so. And if you just look at Iran, Iran's got a population of 90 million. The whole population of Israel is something like, it's under 20 million, I believe. That's the whole population. Iran can definitely muster 1 million soldiers, boots on the ground. It doesn't matter if they're using fucking slingshots. They will wipe Israel out. Now, what happens if Israel gets wiped out? Well, if Israel gets wiped out, what are you left with? You're left with the diaspora, right? You're left with the guys, the Jews that managed to run away from Israel, spread across Europe, Russia? Would Russia take them in? I don't think so. China has definitely said no to them. So most of them would run off to America. What's happening in America? America's on the brink of civil war. It's collapsing internally. And the deep state in America, that is controlled by the diaspora, I believe. And I've known this since the very early 90s when I took a look at like the composition of the US Senate and stuff like that. What are those guys going to do? They're not going to be able to mobilize enough soldiers to save Israel. So they're going to have to like hunker down and try and like keep America. And that's going to be a job because you've got like something like 65 million foreigners have entered the United States over the last few decades. And those guys don't give a shit about America. They're basically, they want to make America Mexico or Somalia, or like the recent is it senator or whatever, Imar Oman or whatever, the one that's married to her own brother. She said, we will defend, Somalian. I'm a Somalian here. I pay taxes in America. She literally said, I'm here for Somalians and Muslims and don't give a crap about Americans. I'm just an infiltrator. She actually said, her own words convict her. So America's not in good shape. Canada is another joke. So you're going to have the guys left in America that are going to try and still control the world. But once Israel collapses, and once Russia has made NATO collapse, and that will be the writing on the wall that like, hey, America's toothless. All the East Bloc countries are going to get rid of the American bases and so on. They're going to say, no, you can fuck off now. Now, unfortunately, places like Italy and Germany, whatever, might take a lot longer because they're like, the Americans are going to be like, no, this is our like foothold and we're going to have to hold on to it. And they've got a lot of bases there, especially in Germany and Italy, because we were on the Axis side. So we've got like 150 American bases. And, the Italians are civilized enough that they're not sort of like, they're not going to start bombing the American bases on a daily basis like the Houthis, like the Syrians are starting to do, because they're getting pushed out like the Iraqis will do. But who knows? It may come. Or a bunch of the imported foreigners that are Syrians, that are Iraqis, that are not actually Italian, might decide that, hey, before we can take over Italy properly, we need to get rid of the Americans. And they might start doing that shit. And America is not going to be able to keep funding their overseas ventures while the trouble that is brewing at home is brewing at home. This may prompt a renaissance, if you like, of the Arab world. Now, there are some things about the Arab world that you might not be aware of. For example, financial, banks, Arab banks do not operate on usury. They do not have usury. They don't charge you interest and they don't give you interest, which is a very novel concept. It doesn't work very well because we're still on fiat money. But the hoarding of gold by both Russia and China, and possibly Texas, and certainly in my own white paper that I wrote in the early 90s, which if I get a time, I'll clean it up and I'll publish it, envisions the future money to be based on gold and silver and fractionalized, so that an ounce of gold is worth X, but over time, that value increases at a set rate so that the value of the money that you use to transact, and the money being a digital representation of the physical representation, the physical amount of gold or silver that's either in a central bank or whatever, but in my view of it, it's live. It's literally, you've got cameras on it. Any member of the public can go and check, like, is the gold physically there? Not like in Fort Knox where all the gold is supposed to be there, and then when the countries that stored it, they say like, hey, we want it back. Oh, it's gone. And then it's like, oh, well, but we really want it back. Okay. And then they sell them. This is not a joke. This happened. So the Americans sent to Germany gold ingots that were not gold. They were like gold-plated titanium bars, which got a different specific weight. So pretty dumb. And the Germans sort of like figured it out and like, oh, by the way, we drilled into them and this is not gold. What the fuck's going on? And America's like, yeah, kind of, we don't know. It's kind of gone. And the Germans sort of like, oh, that's okay. We trust you. It's not a big deal. It's an incestuous little club and you're not in it. But again, if you take another data point, all these elite guys, Mark Zuckerberg and all these guys are building huge bunkers. Zuckerberg is building it on Hawaii, which I think is the tectonic plate of Hawaii is a lot safer than a lot of people would think, but still an island. And anyway, this guy's building all these bunkers. Is that such a big deal? Because are their own security details going to be okay with these guys doing that? What are the families of the security detail going to be like? And if these guys that are doing the bunker, are they going to get all the families of all the security detail guys to also be in the bunker? It becomes a bit troublesome. And then even if you do that, the security guys with all their families safe in the bunker might decide that they don't like you so much anymore. And they don't want to be part of the people that are going to be cemented in by the survivors that eventually figure out, hey, that's that guy that started all this shit. He's got his bunker there. Well, I've got a cement truck. Yeah, I got a shovel. And they might decide that they want to play the role of, hey, we're the guy that strung up Mussolini. We're the good guys. We were never with Mussolini. We strung him up upside down and we shot him. Yeah, we're the good guys. No, we were never fascists. No, 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 no. Being Italian, I have a little bit of experience in this sort of thing. And it's not going to play out well for the Klaus Schwabs and the Bill Gates of this world. So if that happens, and if the banking and finance thing gets put on a completely different setting, which is not fiat money, not debt-based money, and in fact you get rid of the whole concept of debt-based money, that could happen. Especially because the class of people that have instituted this stuff may very well become slightly messy piñatas. And so that is my little wrap up. An hour and 16. I think I'm doing well. I'm now going to read the chat. And if you guys have got comments, questions on what I've said, please fire them on. So let me go from the top. Okay, audio. Hakan says, no stash today. You should possibly consider growing one. It suited you. I did actually have a mustache for a day because I did it like as a joke for to make my daughter and so on laugh. But then I forgot I had it and I went out with it and yeah, I don't see anything wrong with it. Hello, Elia. Okay, just the people saying hello and so on. Wooly Ram says, from what I can see, people are exhausted of negativity. No more juice left to squeeze from their amygdala adrenals. Yes, yes, Wooly, that's a very important point. I was actually going to mention that. Thank you for bringing it up. There was a comedian, I forget what his name is, and it was like towards like year 2 or 3 of COVID or whatever, and he's like doing a stand-up act, and he's like, aren't you guys fucking sick of this shit? Like, I just don't care. I don't give a shit anymore. And people are like, oh, you got to take your booster or you got to put on the mask. And he's like just talking about it. And he's like, and I'm like, yeah, fuck it. I don't care. If I die, I die. And it's funny because it's true. People are just like, yeah. Patch of Truth says, Ram, very true. Yeah. Willie Ram says, question is, do the powers that be try and rehydrate by permitting some good times or quadruple down and keep on going full cycle? Wooly Ram says that Israel is already attacking Lebanon. Oh, we're speeding up, guys. Wooly, I'll put it to you this way. You're a logical man, and you think like a logical man. So you're thinking, well, it doesn't make sense for these guys to quadruple down. Let me tell you, I have worked with some of these people. They don't think like you and I. They're essentially psychotic idiots. By the way, another reason that I put a data point on the Bill Wood guy is because at some point he gets asked a similar question to this, and it's like, why are these guys trying to do this? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It's like bad for everybody, including them. Like it does. And his answer is like, why? Because they're insane. These people are so far removed from reality that they don't realize just how wrong they are, and it's literally insanity. What they're doing makes no logical sense. I have worked with these people that think like this, they tend to be over, well, let's just say they were the kind of guys that have like curly hair by the side of their head, and they supposedly very religious, and they may well be, because their God is the God of this world, so it's a different one from my God for sure. But they can't fathom the idea that they're going to lose. And there are quotes by some famous people. Um, I discussed with you like painting. There's like some painters have written some pretty like big books, although it's questionable whether they wrote it or it was written for them or whatever. But there's some quotes from those books about certain people and how they behave, and like the kind of doubling down that they do incessantly, even when they're proved wrong in front of a crowd of people. If you've never met someone like this, it's quite a shock. Imagine that you're speaking to a guy who tries to insist that you're a liar because you're saying that 2 + 2 is 4. And then you prove him obviously and completely wrong in front of like 20 people. The next day, in front of the same 20 people, he just brings up the same topic again as if what happened yesterday didn't happen at all. And you're like, but what? Everybody here knows what's going on. What are you doing? And we're kind of in that stage now with what's happening in Palestine, and people are starting to see what's really going on there, and like what's being done to the Palestinian people, and they're like, what the fuck, you know, you can't hide that shit anymore. So um, I think they'll keep quadrupling down. So Tides of Truth says, ugh, Omar is a representative from Minnesota. Minneapolis is swarming with Somalis. They're turning the inner city into little Somalia. Yeah, well, that's what happens. Luis Vega is laughing at the piñata thing. Tides of Truth says, when my son was 5, he talked about how he wanted to see George Soros' head on a pike. Lol, he's a good kid. You're right that they're psychotic. I met some peripheral such people. The family had a torture chamber in their basement. Who does that? Totally sociopathic. Yeah, they're perverted in every sense of the word, and including sexually deviant to a degree that you can hardly imagine, and it's pretty horrific. So anyway, that was my overall thing about Looking Glass, and that I think it is realistic. But now the main point I wanted to talk about was, given all this, it absolutely pays for you to be positive, to know that we're going to win, and to like have that feeling deep inside you as knowledge. First of all, it's good for you on a physiological, biological level. It creates chemicals in your body, in your mind, in your brain, that are healthy for you. And even if it is the apocalypse, your thinking badly isn't going to make anything good happen. And what I'm saying, I'm not saying to you like those like positive thinking gurus, like going around like, I'm not going to get run over by a car. I'm not going to get run over by a car. I can cross the road with my eyes closed. Well, don't do that. You're going to get whacked by a bus and die, or worse, get crippled for life. So it's not about that, but it's about knowing at a very deep level inside of you that everything's going to be fine, that you're going to be okay. And that doesn't mean you don't prepare. That doesn't mean that you don't stock up on food, make sure that you can still survive even if money becomes like toilet paper. Um, Make sure you've got some chickens that make eggs, or whatever your thing is, whatever your possibilities are. I've blogged about that plenty on the blog, so you can go and look at those things. But the point is, like, have faith, have a strong. And when I say have faith, obviously I will go on and tell you that you should be a sedevacantist Catholic because everything else is crap. But even when I wasn't a Christian, when I had no inkling of being a sedevacantist or a Catholic of any kind or a Christian of any kind, I've always had this deep intrinsic faith internally. And if you want to know a bit more about that, like I said, go to the blog and read up the blog post that I did, which is still, it's not, I'll post some more stuff later today, but it's called A Strange Hope. So go on the blog, gfilotto.com, and you can I've linked to it below in the description of this video on YouTube. There's a link to it, so you can go and read it. That's basically it. So I hope that this inspires you and makes you feel a bit more comfortable about whatever the hell's going on the planet. That you don't need to stress about it, you don't need to worry about it. You are where you need to be, and just take it in stride, prepare, be as comfortable as you can, and be as prepared as you can. But don't panic, don't get anxious, don't get scared. No reason to. And unless you guys send me some questions or comments about this or any other topic, because I'm now done on this topic, I will call it a night. But I'm gonna have a sip of water, finish off my glass. So you've got a couple of minutes to add to the chat if you want to. Okay. No more questions. All done. I'll wait another minute or so, just because I know there's a bit of a lag, probably due to rural internet. Sam Wedderb says, "What did you say about your olive oil at the beginning?" Oh, the olive oil will be available for sale on the same. If you go to my blog and you go to the books I wrote, there's a button at the top where you can buy the ebooks. On that store will be. I've added the paintings that I do, so you can buy a print of it or even the original in some cases. And the oil will also go there. But actually, that's a good point, Sam. Thanks for asking. I'm gonna need a couple of volunteers, a couple of guys that are willing to like buy the first couple of tins of oil because I want to do a test run. Like most of my readership and so on is in the United States, and the United States has got like weird like customs stuff. So if there are some of you, it's not going to be cheap because look, just the just the olive oil itself, the tin, the cardboard, the bubble wrap, the label to it, the wrapping of it, the securing of the package, that's without any postage, is already in the 20 pound sterling cost. And then there's postage, and and that's without any of my labor, any of like the uh, the costs of the other stuff I have to do, including whatever the trip to the station and to the post office and whatever. So that's not including any of the labor. That's just the cost of things. So, but it's par for the course because Brian Johnston, the guy who sells his olive oil, he sells it at I think $60 for less than a liter, and it's not the best olive oil in the world. Mine actually is. It is the best olive oil in the world. It's certified as the best olive oil in the world for 2 years running now. Not a joke. It's on the whole planet. The expos of olive oil have voted our oil like the best in the world. So it's going to be comparable to his costs. Keep in mind, he's got a huge infrastructure. He's a billionaire. I'm a little guy on a farm that doesn't have a tractor. So my costs are obviously higher per liter than his, but um, it is the best in the world. So I don't know exactly what the cost is going to be. I will find out tomorrow what the shipping costs are to the United States in various different um, possibilities, tracked, not tracked, whatever, and to the UK and possibly to other countries in Europe. So I will let you know. It will within the week. That stuff should be for sale up there. But I could definitely use if any of you are interested in buying a liter of olive oil. I've only got like 12 tins at the moment because um, I only bought like the as a test run. I bought like enough boxes to like ship them and everything. I only bought like a few of them. I've only got 12 tins at the moment because I also had to buy the 1 liter tins and transfer the oil that I have into the 1 liter tins. but there's no pesticides, there's no artificial anything. It's completely 100% natural. There's nothing in it. There's no additives. There's no blending. There's no watering it down. It's unfiltered. It's literally the best olive oil you can get on the planet. So if some of you have got like, a few bucks to throw my way to like do a test run and see that it gets to you okay and everything, that would be great. So, all right. Let's see. Tides of Truth says, thank you for providing inspiration and realism. Not many balance those. Good. You're welcome. Uli Ram says, if you do feel anxious, say some Ave Maria in Latin. Yes. I know it sounds weird, but I started doing that again long before I was baptized, and it absolutely works. In fact, I started doing the Ave Maria when I wasn't in any way inclined to be a Catholic. I did it as a scientific test, and I talk about it in the Sistema book. I did it as a test when training, when fighting, and it absolutely works. So go and look up the Ave Maria in Latin and just repeat it like a mantra. It does absolutely do good. So Tides of Truth says, I do wish to buy some. I will do so. Okay, good man. Ping me an email. I'm not hard to find, and I think you've emailed me before. So ping me an email, and we'll discuss how to go about doing that. And I'll need your address and stuff like that to send it out. Woolly Ram says, don't really know enough to ask coherent questions. Oh, fair enough. Luis Vega says, funny how in Revelation all these roaches go on the ground. Well, yeah. Sam Wereb says, if I can swing it, the cost, I'll be happy to help. Oh, that'd be great. Thank you. I'll let you guys know. I should know as of tomorrow. I should have prices for everything. So I might put it up on the blog or whatever. DTTW says, I will most likely buy one as part of the test run. Oh, thank you very much. That's cool. If, the three of you would be great. Just so you know, the point of this olive oil, of course, you can use it on food and whatever, but the main aim of it is to drink it, to take like a big tablespoon of it with every meal. I drink more than that every day now, and it's helped me immensely because, with working on the farm and whatever, all my joints were inflamed. There's this weird illness that's been going around. My kids have all had it. My wife's still got it, and she can't get rid of it. The kids at my daughter's school had it, and now she kind of got it. But I've so far fought it off. I'm still, physically not as strong as I used to be, so I need to work on that. But I think I put it down to the olive oil. I drink the olive oil, and we also have some proper real honey that's made by the bees that are on our property. So I mix those two things together, and I also take a little bit of black seed olive oil. But the black seed olive oil is, commercial bought stuff, so I don't know how good that is. But our olive oil, it makes a huge difference. If I don't take it for 2 or 3 days, the pain in the joints come back. If I take it daily, I'm fine. So it makes a difference. And I think, by the way, if you go on the blog and you look up at olive, there's a tincture you can make with olive leaves, which I have done and I've tested on myself, and it works. Apparently, this infusion of olive tree leaves is very good for the COVID stuff and spike proteins and all that stuff. So go read on the blog, because I've put in there some of the things that are really actually helpful, and I've tested them on myself because I've had COVID and I've had pneumonia twice, and a friend of ours has had similar sort of issues, and it absolutely makes a difference. Like invermectin did nothing for me. This stuff and the what do you call it, the infusions of dandelion, they made a difference. So I'm just letting you guys know. And well, that's it for tonight, unless there's anything else. Those of you that do want a tin of olive oil, please ping me an email and let's get in touch and let me get your details, because I assume they're going to go pretty quick. I've only got 12 teams. I would like to send out the first, 5 or 6 as a test run to see that everything works. Let me know, and otherwise, God bless every single one of you, and have a good night. And please, one last thing, do spread my blog around, and do spread my YouTube videos on that. It helps me. I'm trying to make a transition to like just work off what I do with my books and the olive oil and a couple of other little things. It would be very helpful if I can, maintain my whole family doing that stuff, because it would allow me to produce a lot more useful information and books and even physical things for you guys to do with, like, energy and so on. So I'd really appreciate your help in spreading the word. I'm crap at marketing myself, so send links to my blog posts and whatever to your friends. I've got a friend that should, in the next few days, I hope, put up a little thing at the bottom of each blog post that says share, and you click on it and it makes it really easy. It's a one click to your Facebook or Telegram or whatever. Oh yes, Luis Vega says another very important thing, which is zinc and a shot of tonic water with quinine. I absolutely agree with you, Luis. The problem is quinine, actual real quinine, is very hard to get. You can't buy it anymore. When I first was in Africa, we used to be able to get proper quinine in like tonic water. Now it's all synthetic bullshit. I have made quinine by using the peel of grapefruits and letting it like soak in water, and that sort of works. But he says he's not got sick in 7 years, and I absolutely believe that. But yeah, the olive oil also, not only that, but it also reduces inflammation generally throughout your whole system, which is a major issue. And there's also like, there's a thing I was watching on probiotics, and there's a little place near Chernobyl, which was a blue zone where like people didn't get sick at all because they had like proper probiotics. And I'm still figuring that out and figuring out some stuff. So if I manage to like figure out some things that I've tested on myself that are not real, it's not just la la bullshit, I may put together a tiny booklet on that stuff that teaches you how to take care of yourself in a natural way that's not, you know, doesn't involve Pfizer or Moderna or those people. Anyway, thank you all for listening. And yeah, help spread the word if you can, because I think it's good to give people hope and have them have a reality-based reason for feeling good. It's always helpful if you've got something solid to base your good feeling on. So anyway, thank you very much. God bless you, and keep well. Have a good week. Good night.